Mr. Hahn, please take a seat so we can start the meeting. All right, we're ready to start the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. It should be a quick meeting. We don't have much to discuss on this except for the August report. And I will ask Mr. Herschel to please start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's begin on page 1. What I want to highlight on the first page is that tax collection continues to come in at a very brisk pace compared to, even with that of a year ago. Definitely seeing above projected collection in obviously business privilege tax, which we've talked about, but also now in resident earned income tax, which at 67% of the year was coming in at 69% of revenue. So, and those are a couple of very big sources. So I'm very pleased that general revenue is coming in at the pace that it is. Permits and licenses have been coming in at a very steady rate themselves. Charges for services are up a little bit over a year ago. So across the board, we are seeing more revenue in all of the categories compared to August of a year ago. And then we go on to the second page, which shows the remainder of that money coming in. At the same point a year ago, we were at $73.5 million received in the general fund. So far this year, we're over $82 million. And there are going to be some things that come up in September and October that will add to that. I do know for one thing that we just received our state aid for pension calculation, which came in a little bit higher than it did a year ago, and so that will be I'm expecting that it's going to actually top what we had projected in the general fund for that one, which will be good. So more on that in the next month's report. That's pretty much what I wanted to concentrate on with respect to the revenues. On page 3, with the general fund expenditures, we did have 3 pay periods in the month of August, which is why the wages went up a little bit higher. There will only be 2 pay periods in September, so that will come back in calendar form to the same number of weeks as a year ago after the September report. But even with that, our overall expenses remain very much constrained for the year. And overall, we are spending right now at 59% of budget compared with what was 61% of the total a year ago. In 63.3 million we had spent a year ago. At this point, we're at 65.9 this year, and we expected we were going to be up a little bit, but that's not obviously as big a jump as what we're seeing on the revenue side. So that means our overall balance is in a better shape than it was same time a year ago. Going over to the Trexler Fund. I want to say on this one that as we've been in the final stages with the Trexler Trust of planning a long-term commitment in terms of how Trexler monies will be used by the city, that there still is a sizable amount of reimbursement that we have made requests for to the Trexler Trust that will be released to us once that agreement is finalized, which I'm expecting will be any day now. So the reason you're not seeing very much showing up on revenue for the Trexler Fund is that we are waiting for the resolution of that agreement, and then we will see a sizable reimbursement coming back to the city. Expenses are in line with what we had anticipated because we definitely had committed a bit more resources in the 2018 budget to the Trexler Fund for operational purposes. That is probably not something that will continue in that vein, as the Trexler Trust has made very clear they want to have a steadier commitment of capital funding going forward, and we understand that completely. With respect to the risk fund, on page 5, we had a healthier August, which certainly helped in terms of slowing down the increase a bit in our in account 37 on expenditures for health. But that's still something that we're watching out for at this point and trying to maintain appropriate cost controls over the remainder of the year to be cognizant with, because this is a fund that has been been tapped a great deal since the beginning of the year in terms of legal fees, et cetera. And we have to make sure we're keeping track of that the fund balance will remain very, very good. So I keep my eyes open on that regularly. Solid Waste Fund coming in very similar to a year ago on page 6, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. No real surprises in any of that aspect at this point. Nothing more I really need to say about that. Stormwater Fund also coming in about as expected for this point of the year. We will see probably a little bit of leftover collections on the revenue side before year end, but the July 15th was the due date for on-time payment. So the bulk of that money has indeed come in for the year, and expenses are in line at this point with what we had anticipated at start of the year for expenditures. Onto the Gulf Fund. In spite of the bad weather in August, we actually took in revenue from greens fees, cart rentals, et cetera, that was not all that much below the 3 previous months. But we are still in a situation there where we are still in a deficit situation overall, which I'll point out when we get to the fund balances, and we continue to watch that carefully to be sure there are things we can do going forward to get rid of that negative balance. The 911 fund on page number 9, I believe that's where we've gotten up to at this point. We received our third quarter revenue from the state in August out of that fund. My anticipation is that however the eventual transfer occurs on the 911, that we will be continuing to receive that money both for fourth quarter of this year and first and second quarter of next year before the complete transition is made to Lehigh County for that service. Still working out details, obviously, with them of the transition at this point, but at this stage, we continue to utilize that fund source to pay our dispatchers and to take care of other emergency needs. On to page 10, this is showing by department the trends in permanent wages, premium pay, and shift differential. Nothing tremendously out of line from the previous month, though we have seen there was a bit of an increase in premium pay for police and fire in the month of August. We talked a little bit before that a lot of what's being driven on the fire side probably happened earlier in the year dealing with the EMT, or maybe not EMT, my apologies, the paramedic vacancies. So that number is coming in a little bit higher than it was a year ago. Police is actually, overtime is coming in very similar to where we were at for a year ago, although we are heading into the busier months of the year. And nothing else really on the permanent wages or the shift differential that is significantly different from the past year. On page 11, we deal with the cash balances in both pooled and non-pooled accounts, and you can see here what I had said with regard to Trexler Park, that $1 million deficit that you're showing there is going to be made whole as soon as we complete the agreement with the Trexler Trust on how we're going to fund projects going forward. That's why that one is showing in the negative position that it is. Everything else is pretty much in line with what you would expect to see, and I would point out in the non-pooled cash for the month of August that we have made a $3 million investment with Manning and Napier. As I had said we were going to at some point, which is coming from as a portion of the 2006 loan fund, and so you can keep track of those monies still being together. We put those two rows together now so you can see the total money that is between the two funds, which is still about $5.2 million. But we have $3 million of that's invested now with Manning and Napier, and we will be tracking very carefully the interest that we expect to be collecting on that money over the remaining course of the year. After that, you have the vacancy report, and yes, we are still running a rather high vacancy level so far for the year. You can look at the individual positions that follow it to see everything that remains on it. That's my report.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, any comments from my colleagues in
honestly, I think it's a very good report that you put together. I think it's pretty easy to understand. Just so I'm clear, on the police budget, or the overtime budget, has that increased since last year this time, or is it? I thought you said it was pretty equal, no?
Let me go back to that page and I will point out, because there are a few columns on that. At the same time that we were at in August a year ago, I'm looking on page 10, and I'm going all the way over to the right under what would be the 2017 month-to-date column. That number shows 1,099. That means at this same time a year ago, we spent $1,099,000 on premium pay and police. So far this year, we're at $1,134,000. So that number is only up $35,000. Thank you, sir.
In fact, the one that I'm more worried about is the fire. This,
Indeed, and I think, again, a portion of that, remember that we probably didn't have quite enough in the budget. You saw how much we spent last year at $1,882,000 for this. Only $1,250,000 was the starting budget on this for this year. And given what happened earlier on in the year with paramedics, trying to fill those positions, there was a little bit of earlier pressure on that source for premium pay. And yes, we did have a bump up in August, and I would need to look into that in some more detail as to why that bumped up as much as it did that month. But I don't think, compared with historical numbers, that it's really too unusual at this point of the year. I think that compared to what was budgeted for it, though, it's going to end up being a bit bigger than that.
sorry, you said that you would end up at what it is budgeted?
I think it's gonna pass what's budgeted for this year. I don't think.
Yeah, it looks like that.
Yeah, definitely so. I think police is gonna come in very close to what they have for their budget, but fire's budget is not as great, and I think theirs is gonna go a bit higher.
Thank you, Mr. Hassel. Any comments, any further comments? Go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hartzell, on page 1, so we have zoning permits. We have a pretty significant drop from last year. We were at 69% last year, we're at 16% of the budgeted amount for this year. Do we know if there's a reason for that?
I think there is a reason for that, and I think it has to do, if I go over to the 2017 column, the 69% is actually the amount of the total of the year that was captured. There was $87,000 a year ago. So 60,000 out of that total was 69%. I think we had budgeted more in that particular category because when we were coming up on the budget last year, I think there was an anticipation that we might be raising the zoning permit fees, and that didn't happen.
Okay.
And we didn't address that, obviously, in reducing the revenue side of that. So I take responsibility for that.
Okay, and I remember that when there was the desire for the increase in the zoning and planning fees. So, on page 3, so looking at expenditures, our printing costs, our mileage reimbursement costs, and also the training and professional development costs. Could you give a statement as to why those numbers, I'm not complaining on the printing and mileage reimbursement that they're that low, but I'm curious also about training and professional development, why they're so much lower.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. I would need to look into that a little bit more and talk with staff from the other departments about why that's happening. I know in just speaking from finance's point of view, we have been carrying through our training program about at the same level as is usual. I'd have to look into that a little further.
Is some of that going to be due to the transfers we've made for the malware issues and some other issues? I know we took some money from training, I believe.
I'm sure that's a contributor. I don't know that I would rate it as being the major factor in that, though.
Okay.
If I could take a stab at that, from looking at the budgets in 2017, there's one of the things I found that in the 32 account, there's tremendous variance between what's budgeted and what's actually spent. Some of it, they just figured they were going to put the money there and maybe they'll use it, and Sometimes it just depends on the personnel they've got and whether they need, whether they need training at that point in time. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Some of these licenses may be multi-year licenses.
Right.
But come budget time, I mean, it's certainly something the council should, look at to make sure that what's budgeted by these departments is what they actually intend to expend.
Well, and my concern is always on the fact that, keeping not just professional certifications, but regular trainings are important, as you know, it's why your department is online with what you wanted it to do. So hopefully that's something, perhaps, as Ms. Sally DeSumi is going through and doing all of her work, and I didn't see it, I see her shaking her head.
Yes.
We can get a better sense as to what trainings are being conducted and move forward, okay? On page 5. So we're looking at the increase, specifically of 947% for claims paid and reimbursements. Are we doing a better job there, or is that?
And a lot of that is also looking that we had 84,000 at this point a year
Right.
ago, and it was 284,000 this year. Obviously, what we got on there was, we had 290,000 on this a year ago, and I'm guessing we might have thought that was an anomaly of some sort, which is why we only factored 30,000 in for it for this year, but it
Okay.
seems to be happening similarly again, so maybe that's becoming a newer pattern on that one.
Okay. I appreciate that, Mr. Hartzell. And then below on the expenditure side, the self-insured losses and also the professional losses, we seem to be doing a very good job at containing those.
Mhm.
So is that, we're just getting lucky, or is it some new policies and procedures that we're looking at that are also helping us there?
Well, I've no doubt that Mr. Nelson is working very carefully to make sure that we limit our exposure as much as is possible on that side, and so I would defer to him for the details on it, but I know he's working very hard at it.
Okay, and I only have 2 more questions for you, and I appreciate Mr. Hartzell. Stormwater fund. We took in, if I remember looking at this correctly, 91% of the budgeted amount. How are we doing with collections on that remaining percentage? And are any of those, I know one of them obviously is going to be related to the lawsuit, but other than that, are we looking at mainly small properties? Are there any large commercial properties? Is there any rhyme or reason to what's outstanding?
My expectation at this point of the year is, because they went on the real estate bills, that we would have seen, as I'm looking backward a little bit at the moment to make sure I understand this quite rightly. Not surprisingly, there are quite a few bills that, when we go out, we meet the July 15th deadline, and they haven't come in yet, and so we're now sending out billing notices to those who have not or have not paid enough. I mean, that time is coming here very shortly, and with the notice that if they don't get that payment completed to us by December 31st, that at least, whether like the real estate tax that goes to the, oh, would you like to do this? I am going to allow the expert to speak on this one, Tricia Dickert.
Hi, okay. So I can tell you that the underpaid notices for city real estate tax or for that billing are set to go out on the 5th of November. So I think after those notices go out, we should probably have a better idea if that collection percentage is close to what we usually see for the trash line item on the bill and for the real estate tax. I think after that delinquent notice or that underpaid notice goes out, we'll have a better idea of what accounts are left that simply didn't pay it because maybe they're holding out, they don't feel that they owe it, or maybe there's, it's a part of some bigger picture that I'm just not aware of. So November 5th is the date for the underpaid notices. I think after those go out, we'll have a better idea of what that percentage is going to be on the whole.
Okay, great, thank you.
Let me just follow up on that. So do they, it comes with the regular city taxes, so do they just go out and say, I pay the taxes, and this is, when they write the checks, if they only pay, do they actually specify this is for taxes, not for the stormwater fee, or how do you determine which one to pay?
Well, it's usually, they certainly can, so they can submit a payment for real estate tax on a bill that they received, real estate tax, stormwater, and garbage, and they can specifically write in the memo section of their check that the amount that they're intending to pay is to be applied solely to real estate tax, and I think we would obviously honor that if that's what they requested. But I think it's also a transition year, and this is a year that people are seeing this type of bill with that type of charge, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's people that just haven't really been paying attention to the charge that's on there, thinking maybe it's, you know, property that's exempt for real estate taxes, so it's not mine, but they're not really looking at the detail of the bill. I think these are, you know, it's forensics like this that I think we'll be able to get a better idea of over the next 2 months.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Judy. My last question, Mr. Hartzell, concerns the loan investment. Could you give us a quick rundown on what type of investments those are?
There are some very clear provisions in state law about things like money market accounts, CDs, very liquid investments that we have to make sure that our funds are invested in, and I take that very seriously. The decision that I made on that in investing $3 million is knowing that we come into the end of the year when we're dealing with probably the cash crunch part of the year most significantly. About $1 million of that $3 million has a maturity date of about 4 months on it, so that cash will be available to us at the end of the year if necessary. The remaining $2 million is in longer term, year, 18-month long investments for the most part. Very liquid assets, nothing that is going to have a huge risk that we're expecting the type of interest rate returns in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.5% on it. I will be fully expecting that when we get through as we see the returns coming in on those investments, to be looking for that type of number coming back.
Okay, and then let's just say for a minute that we would have a serious emergency and we would need to pull from this for an issue. What type of penalties, or what process, I should say, would we be looking at if we needed to retrieve this money quickly?
I think that if that were necessary for the remaining $2 million, I don't think that from the conversations I've had with Manning and Napier, if we had to get to that point, there probably would be a small penalty, but I don't think it would be anything too severe. We tried to obviously set up the account in such a way that we would have the maximum amount of cash on hand at the end of December for that purpose, and they've been working with us very carefully because they want us to succeed as much as they want themselves to succeed out of this. I will get you some more details on that.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Hartzell. Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, sir. Just one last question. Let me see if I can find it It was on page 1, Mr. Hartzell, 2933, the 3 sale inspections. It seems to be, all the real estate is continuing to go up, and I think it's selling a little bit more than before, but the 3 sale inspection is actually down a bit. I'm not sure.
It's certainly not at the level that we were expecting budgetarily at this point, though I do believe that there are resources that are being directed toward that for the remainder of the year that should cause that revenue to bump up significantly. It is coming in at a higher amount than it was the same time a year ago, but we had a lower expectation, of course, a year ago on the revenue coming in. So I at least have been made aware that there are not amendments, what I was going to say, but I mean, a desire on the part of community and economic development to be putting resources in that area for the remainder of the year and bump that number up.
Yeah, hopefully. Anybody else from the dais?
This isn't a critique, please don't take it as such. It's more or less a comment and maybe a request. As we have somebody new in HR right now, and I don't want to butcher your name, Melanie, I would make a request. One concern of mine, being near and dear to my heart, of course, is the police department. And it seems to be constant that we have a lot of vacancies there. So what I would ask, and with the mayor's support, is that perhaps you meet with the chief and whoever else is most involved in the hiring process and offer anything you may have, any suggestions, as someone coming from outside the city, and I realize you have a lot on your plate right now, but at some time in the near future perhaps, and maybe there's some suggestions you can offer once you understand the process that they're dealing with. And again, not a critique, because I've done it myself. It's a very difficult, very arduous process, and you want to get the best and the brightest. But just a suggestion, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Anybody else? Okay, anybody from the public? Mr. Hunt?
Good evening, council. In light of what I just heard, Mr. Robinson explain about the finances and how in-house we can get money and applying the interest that we're getting and keep the the lockbox money out of the bond and use that same scenario that Mr. Hartzell agreed with Mr. Courtney about how we can make interest in 7 months or 4 months or 2 months on the thing. I'm happy to hear that both of them have a change of heart and it's possible to make it work just based on what they just told us here. So I want to thank them for reconsidering and agreeing to remove it. Thank you so much.
Good observation, sir. I don't think you're gonna get any response on that one. Mr. Hirschman?
Thank you. Eastside of Allentown. My first question is, Mr. Hartzell mentioned we get 2.5% on long-term interest rate. I see in the paper an advertisement say we can get 2.93 for a 2-year interest rate. And we're paying the consultant 1% to find us 2.5%. Something's wrong, Mr. Grady. And do we need an investment advisor to get us 2.5% when we can pick up the morning call at a higher interest rate?
Well, Mr. Hirschman?
The actual pay is not 1%, it's 0.32%. That is the total amount that we pay as far as that goes. And my anticipation is that every time I have spoken with Manning and Napier originally, they said, well, I think you're gonna get about 150 basis points, and then the next time it becomes, well, we're gonna get about 200. That number has been going up with the investments that they have been doing, just along with all of the other interest rates. So I am perfectly happy when we start seeing the returns on this, to make a determination as to whether it is still a wise investment to go with. But given the resources that our department is doing at this time, I felt it was a prudent move to have an investment advisor come in and assist us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hirschman.
Based on what I read in the morning call, what Mr. Hartzell saying, I think we disagree. It's costing us money. And we can ill afford additional costs, Mr. Chairman. I think you as Chairman there should look into our investment policy. We have no investment policy. The charter said we should have an investment policy. I've never seen one since you and I started in city council. Every year we review it. These guys don't review anything. And my next question, Mr. Chairman, you are gonna find out what the taxable interest rate is gonna be, what the interest rate is gonna be on a taxable bond issue. Have the administration got back to you?
Not yet, I think, they're still.
We're still waiting, we're in the statement, in the public offering statement is just about ready. We had a long conversation on that earlier today, and I will have some more exact figures for you on that at the next time we convene.
Okay.
Because, Mr. Chairman, this could affect the bond issue. Because $20 million or $30 million or some dollars is taxable. And that could affect what our savings are, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's another thing you should look into, Mr. Chairman. There's so many things you have to look into these finances here. The golf course is at a deficit. I look here at,
No, we're talking about our.
deficits here. I mean,
What was the last
we
thing?
can't continue. I'd like to see what the budget's gonna look like when we get it in.
What was the last thing you said?
I would like you, as the chairman, call a special meeting and look into our finances more, to what's happening, why we have need an investment manager to earn, we're losing money. We're paying him only 3%.
No, they're not.
It's just like 0.3%.
0.32%.
3.2%.
That's right, so it's 1%, 1/3, 1%.
That's less
But
than
we could go
1%.
to morning call, by the morning call and earn a higher interest rate. I think we have to look into this, Mr. Chairman. This is not right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. Mr. Hunsaker.
Glenn Hunsaker, South Allentown. I guess I first want to ask Mr. Glazier where we stand on reconciliation right now, before we talk about something else.
I'll be giving a report during the council meeting. I'll be happy to address it then, sir.
But you can address anything with regards to the budget and finance report. The reconciliation, he'll talk about it.
We could just,
You probably-
he could say we're up to March. That's okay, it's all right, we're gonna play
I'm
the
sure he's,
technical game here, I
I'm
guess.
sure he's gained some months over there.
One of the things we were talking about earlier, the amount of money coming in the stormwater versus the taxes, and I was just looking at page one. The taxes basically said on page one, we're about 95% in, and the stormwater, we're about 66%. So there is some disparity in the percentages, so it looks like there are people holding back.
If I may on that one, the percentage we've got on that is actually 91%, so it is a little bit lower, but not that much of a disparity.
91%.
91.
Yes, that's what's showing right now with the stormwater fund. If I pull up the revenues on that, it is showing that we're at 91% of budget.
So there's only a 4% difference?
That is correct.
Okay. We had some discussion with the administration on this 2006 loan, which you people have approved of. And basically, if you looked in the Sunday paper, all the percentages, and you were advocating, the H team was advocating for the last year or so to do this in-house. It doesn't take much to go and call up and say, I'm gonna put in a couple $1 million, unless you don't have it, and get 2.53% and do it in-house. And we're gonna pay the guy, the investment group, 1% or 1.5% on the 5.3 million, I guess we have invested right now. So, I mean, I still think we should really look into doing that in-house. Unless this guy's gonna get 5% for us and give us 4%, that's a different story. But our point last week was, with the 2006 loan, the city in 2005 or 6 borrowed $10 million. Of that, they had $5 million for investments. Of that $5 million, the city was earning, what?
Well, before the Great Recession, it would have been a significantly higher.
As of
interest
now,
rate.
we were earning 1% on that. The effective rate of that money that we're giving is $700,000 away was reduced, the 2.5 was reduced by 1%. You have to look at the whole $10 million, that's the deal. So we were really only paying for that money, the 7.8 that we owe, we're only paying 1.5%. And if you look at what's gonna happen, these are gonna track together. As the Fed raises rates, your interest rates, if you have them deposits or in these kind of accounts, are gonna track to some degree. I'm not saying they're gonna be perfect, but they're not gonna get to where the 9.5% is, even 4%. You have to always subtract that. In this particular case, whoever set that up, that variable rate, did a very fine job, in my opinion. That's what you have to look at. So we're not gonna start at 2.5 and then go to 3 or 3.5. It might, but you have to look at it. As your interest rates go up on your investments and the other interest rates go up, they're gonna track. That's all I wanna say.
That was my argument last time, but I didn't win it. So, anyway, anybody else? If not, I'd like to adjourn this meeting. We have another meeting coming up. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
members. Thank you, Mr. Turkey.
Thank you, sir. And, the next meeting is,